We all know what it feels like to be trapped in a conversation. Despite giving the usual social cues, you can't get out, and there's a distinct feeling that it's gone just too long. Do you know what I'm talking about? That kind of awkward feeling. Lately, I found it relatively easy to get out of situations like this. Given my line of work, I have found bringing up this is almost a guaranteed conversation stopper. It's awkward and it's hard, and I've yet to meet someone who actually wants to talk about it. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about a phone. The innovations we've seen in recent years around the ability to communicate in real time and to consume video content on the go is astounding. You may even be watching the recording of this phone, this talk on a phone. However, hidden and lurking just below the surface of the good intentions we have for this technology is a disturbing reality where people pervert these innovations for truly evil reasons. In this case, stealing the innocence of children. So what I am going to talk about today is the cybersex trafficking of children, which perpetrators know all you need is one of these. I work at International Justice Mission, the world's largest anti-slavery organization, and we work in communities around the world to combat various forms of everyday violence which trap people into systems of slavery like cybersex trafficking. And make no mistake, this is a form of modern slavery. Pedophiles around the world use a screen and a camera connected to the internet, directing and the live stream sexual abuse of a child they want to see. Perhaps the hardest part about this crime is that on the end where the child is, the person facilitating the crime is often a parent, a caregiver, or a trusted adult that has figured out they can make quick cash by selling their child or a neighbor's child online for $155. They put the children through hell so that somebody on the other side of the world can live out twisted fantasies of seeing kids perform sex acts on themselves, with other children, with adults. I could go on, but I think you get the point. From a perpetrator point of view, there's low barriers to the crime. There's no travel required, unlike sex tourism. There's this idea of impunity, or that they'll never be caught for the crime, and there's an assumption of anonymity, which emboldens perpetrators to the point where they force kids to do things that would make your and the average person's skin crawl. Now, while the barriers may be low for the perpetrators, the barriers of recovery for the child victims are extraordinarily high. They are exposed to the evils of the world through a screen where a predator is waiting to take advantage. It's hard to rescue them in the first place because, unlike a brothel, I just put the technology back in my pocket. It can move really easily. And finding appropriate care environments to house children who have been rescued is extremely difficult when you factor in the fact that, for the most part, we're talking about very young kids, often sibling groups, boys and girls together, that have been forced to live in an overtly sexual atmosphere. As we've begun engaging in this work, there are some really troubling trends that we've noticed. Internationally, the average age of a survivor from traditional sex trafficking is around 16. In cybersex trafficking, we're talking about 12-year-old kids. According to IJM's casework, 50% of the kids that have been rescued are under the age of 12, and my colleagues have rescued a 2-month-old baby. Before first words, first steps, when all that should be experienced is the comfort of a loving parent, innocence is snatched through that black mirror. This is not something anybody enjoys talking about, but we must, because this crime is growing and it will continue to grow unnoticed in the dark unless we break those cycles of anonymity and impunity. Between 2011 and 2015, there has been a 350% increase in reports of child sexual abuse online coming out of Canada. And that number is growing exponentially. The Philippines receives over 1,000 tips every single month to rescue kids out of cybersex trafficking, and those tips originate from the U.S.'s National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Having said all of that, the worst case that we've ever encountered was perpetrated by a 28-year-old man living in Saskatchewan. Between 2011 and 2015, he paid $23,000 to abuse kids online in the Philippines and in Romania. The lead RCMP investigator in the case said it was the worst collection of child abuse that he has ever seen. The perpetrator ended up pleading guilty to 40 charges and is now serving a 12-year sentence. I don't want to dwell on him. Instead, today, I want to talk to you about the successful rescue of Marco. Marco is a survivor. We first heard about him in February of 2015 when Filipino authorities got a tip from the UK. Law enforcement officials there had discovered an image of him along with 4,000 other images of children being exploited online on a computer in London. The man who owned this computer was operating under the assumptions of anonymity and impunity, and he was mistaken. He's now also serving a 12-year sentence, and his activity led to the discovery of Marco. So Marco lives in a poor neighborhood on the tropical island in the Philippines. And to the outside world, he's your average 7-year-old kid. His favorite subject in school is math. He loves Superman, and his favorite color is yellow. I'm told by those who know him well that he's very smart, sweet, and stubborn, which reminds me of my own son. However, as nighttime fell, Marco and his 2-year-old sister, Gabby, were forced to do things that no child should ever even be aware of. They were forced to stand in front of a computer, perform sex acts directed from places they'd never heard of by strangers they didn't know, live, over the internet. And like so many kids, it was Marco's own mother who was facilitating the crime. She had distributed images and videos to 19 different countries, including Canada. Now, as I said, Marco loves Superman, and as a good older brother, sometimes in a quiet moment, would take his cape, his pretend cape, and wrap it around his little sister as a way of him trying to protect her from the violence that was all around them. Little did he know that forces were already at work to rescue them out of this desperate situation. 6 a.m. on a Thursday morning, local law enforcement, supported by a team from IJM, drove into their neighborhood. And miraculously, everything went according to plan. We found Marco, we found Gabby, we found their cousins, age 8 and 13, all the kids originally identified on that computer screen in London. The children, they were afraid, confused. They didn't want to leave their home. As horrific as the abuse was, it's their story, it's their childhood, and at least it's predictable. In that sense, rescue can initially feel really scary, unknown, and lonely. This is a picture of Marco during the operation, scared and hesitating to get into the van. The social worker that was with him during the weekend, who helped the children to open up to police, recalls that he was quiet in the van. His biggest concern was to make sure nobody at school knew what was going on. The shame associated with the abuse was simply too much for him to carry. I recently had a chance to meet with this amazing woman who cared for the kids in those days. And she showed me 2 coloring pages. Gabby's was a carrot, and Marco's was a transformer, which just underlines the fact that these are real kids, just like mine, and potentially yours. Marco's story today is very different. He's living out new routines. After going through trauma-informed therapy, he's living with his grandmother. The kids are learning how to heal. Sometimes they talk about the things of the past, the trauma and the betrayal, and sometimes they get to play and rediscover the wonder of being a child. While Marco's story has a great ending, The reality is, this crime is like a wildfire, and it's spreading across the Philippines, and it's being fueled by demand from sources all over the world. It should not be like this. It cannot be like this. My stomach turns every single time I think back to playing basketball with small boys in a shelter just outside of Cebu who are just like Marco, having recently been rescued from this menace. There are so many kids, and the violence is incredibly dark. But we know that we can stop it. At IJM, we have over 20 years of successful casework on our side, which demonstrates a theory of change that works. When you rescue kids from violence, restore the victims back to wholeness, hold the perpetrators accountable, and that entire time help to the entire justice system as a whole, you can make a material difference not just for a few kids, but for millions of people. Now, you may be asking, how can you speak with such confidence about that? In the same region where Marco is from, we conducted a 4-year project supported through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that set a goal to try to reduce the number of minors in brothels and other establishments by 20%. Blowing all expectations out of the water, external auditors measured in those 4 years a 79% reduction. Bringing that crime from rampant to rare. When you replace impunity with accountability, violence is reduced dramatically. Which brings me back to where we started. Because building will in the justice system on the other side of the planet is not enough. If the demand is here in our city, in our country, the demand from people who enjoy anonymity and impunity need to be stopped. You see, while I may be up here giving this talk, I really don't like talking about this. It hurts me to imagine what kids like mine are forced to live through. But until we can figure out how to turn this away from being a vehicle to carry out senseless acts of violence against kids into a catalyst for change, then we can be like Marco. We can be the hero. We can take that cape and wrap it around kids who are vulnerable to this kind of violence and try to protect them. I want you all to ask yourself a question. The next time you take out your phone or when this recording stops, look in that mirror, that black mirror, and ask, are you going to do something about this? Or are you going to be quiet because it's awkward? If you decide that you want to do something, I encourage you, go to notonmyscreen.ca. Learn how to raise the conversation. Take the pledge dedicating that you will not use the screen to abuse kids. Put the sticker on the phone. Learn how to raise the conversation so that our world and our kids, we can try to make them safe. Thank you.